I am Diane Dobitz. I'm the worship associate today and a longtime member of our fellowship. Our Reverend Diana McLean is our minister, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Mankato. All of you, whether joining us in person or on Zoom, are welcome in this time that we make sacred together. We extend an especially warm welcome if this is your first time attending one of our worship services. We know and appreciate that it can be difficult to cross the threshold of a new church for the first time, whether in person or online. As a Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, we humbly acknowledge that before European colonization, the Dakota peoples were stewards of the land on which our fellowship building sits. They teach us that the land does not belong to any of us, though it holds the history of our conflicts and our attempts at reconciliation. As we commit to an ongoing and intentional journey of humble connection with Indigenous peoples, characterized by understanding our shared history, accepting responsibility for restoration, and building relationships in the here and now, we seek to be good relatives. In keeping with that commitment, our board voted last week to make a decision to donate to the Minnesota Makoche Honor Tax, to contribute financially to the Dakota people of this area. Sunday morning is a team effort, and I'm grateful for all who are willing to serve. Our pianist this morning is Shay McKay. Director of Children's Faith Development, Macy's Forsyth, will share a story for all ages by video. Children's Chapel will be led by Deb Fitzloff. Our nursery care is provided by staff members Lyndon Anthony and Alexander Sinchanawa. Thanks to our worship tech, Kat Clements, and sound assistant, Sarah Cyphers, and thanks to Denny Cramblett for taking care of hearing assistance. Linda Gansky was our greeter. If you are new to the fellowship, we are grateful that you are expanding the we that is us. And if you are attending by Zoom today, you're welcome to stay after the service to visit together. For those attending in person, we have coffee and refreshments in the fellowship hall, thanks to Alicia Bear and her family today. We are always in need of more people to take turns in these roles to make Sunday mornings possible. We're especially in need of more people to take turns assisting Kat with the sound system, and there are many opportunities other than that. There's a clipboard in the hutch in the entryway for you to sign up for one of the ways to serve, and you can also sign up on Sign Up Genius, which is in our website. There are 2 additional announcements this morning. Stewardship packets were mailed out within the last week to those who did not pick them up last Sunday. And if you did not receive one, please let our office administrator, Shelley, or Reverend Diana know, and we will get one to you. Our goal is to have the pledges returned by Sunday, February 18th. And beginning on the 29th of this month, Reverend Diana will be leading an online discussion group of the book Repentance and Repair, which is this year's UUA Common Read. And you can see more about that in the weekly email and updates for more details. Together, let us kindle a flame symbolizing our co-creation of sacred space at home and in this place made sacred by years of love. If you are with us on Zoom, please write in the chat that a chalice is lit on your street. And please say the words with me from the pew cards. We are a welcoming people of diverse beliefs who commit to nourish the spirit, broaden the mind, nurture the earth, and build community. May this flame we kindle remind us to strive today and every day to love beyond belief.
In October, I participated in a civil rights pilgrimage to Memphis and Mississippi through the Living Legacy Project. I shared in one of my weekly columns right after my return that it would take me some time to reflect on it before I would be ready to preach about it. In fact, one of the staff leading the pilgrimage told us at the beginning that we might well be processing it for the rest of our lives. While I think that is probably true, after 4 months, it feels right to share what I can about the pilgrimage with you as we begin both Black History Month and our Soul Matters February theme of justice and equity. First, let me say why I'm calling this and why the staff call it a pilgrimage rather than a tour. Though I have made many visits to places where I felt a sense of the sacred, this was my first time participating in travel that was explicitly designed as a pilgrimage. The program staff were clear that we were not there as tourists or on vacation, but as pilgrims, visitors to sacred places, witnesses to the history embodied in those places, and witnesses to the stories of people from the past and present of those places. A pilgrimage is something deeper, more spiritual, more transformative than tourism. The pilgrimage was a total of only 5 days, 2 of which were mostly taken up with plane travel to and from our starting and ending point of Memphis, Tennessee, and 3 full days of which were spent in various parts of Mississippi. I took copious notes throughout all of those days, and when I started writing this sermon using those notes as my starting point, I tried to bring you all along with me through a chronological narrative of our days. I tried to include the reflection questions that we discussed each evening after dinner in the small groups that we were assigned to for the whole trip. When I got as far in the sermon as the beginning of the 3rd day, not even the middle of our pilgrimage yet, I realized I had already written over 2,000 words, which is nearly a full sermon's worth of words, and I was nowhere near done with what I wanted you to hear today. So I decided to take a completely different approach to that linear narrative. Maybe another time we can plan for me to give a presentation, not in the context of worship, with that more linear narrative, more facts, and some of the hundreds of pictures that I took during that trip. But we don't have time for all that this morning. The trip was a powerful immersion in civil rights history, exposing to me some familiar stories with more detail than I'd heard, and some stories that I never learned in school, from elementary through grad school. But it was also something less academic and much more visceral than that. And that's what I hope to convey to you this morning, more than the facts. Now, it's not all that often that passages from Hebrew scripture pop randomly into my head, but several times during the pilgrimage, I thought of the passage in Exodus, chapter 3, verse 5, when God's voice is speaking to Moses from within a burning bush. And God says, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." There have been rare but powerful occasions in my life when I have felt an almost irresistible impulse to stand barefoot somewhere because it feels so sacred. But on this trip, it happened again and again. Now, I did not actually take off my shoes any of those times. It wouldn't have been appropriate in the places where we were. However, back on the bus, I hurriedly jotted notes that would eventually become a poem and then most of the remainder of this sermon. I called it On Holy Ground. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The parking lot below the balcony outside room 306 of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, now the National Civil Rights Museum. Look up and you can see a red and white memorial wreath where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed for speaking truth to power. From a hallway inside, you can see on the balcony where a piece of the concrete stained with Reverend Dr. King's blood was removed and replaced. Below the balcony, a memorial plaque to Dr. King includes this passage from the book of Genesis, chapter 37, verses 19 and 20. They said to one another, "Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams." The day before his assassination, Reverend Dr. King gave a speech in Memphis that ended with these words: "Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The cement floor of the pavilion at the Fannie Lou Hamer gravesite, where we listened to the words of her speech to the Democratic Convention in the voice of another powerful Black woman, singer and songwriter Melanie DeMore. The base of the nearby statue of Fannie Lou Hamer has several of her quotes, including this one: "I'm never sure when I leave home if I'll make it back or not. But if I fall, I'll fall 5 feet 4 inches forward for freedom, and I'm not backing off." Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The former Glendora Cotton Gin, now the Emmett Till Historic Intrepid Center, about 100 yards from the home of one of Emmett's abductors and murderers who also owned the Cotton Gin, and about 3 miles from where Emmett's body was pulled from the Tallahatchie River. A 70-pound fan from this cotton gin was used to weigh Emmett down when they put his body in the river. He was 14 years old, visiting from Chicago, and killed because he was accused of whistling at a white woman. Emmett had polio at age 6. The only lasting result was a stutter. His mother taught him to whistle, which helped him alleviate the stutter when it happened. Was he really whistling at the white woman, or merely whistling in her presence? Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The driveway at the former home of Medgar and Merle Evers, where Medgar was shot and killed in their carport just after midnight on June 12, 1963, as he returned from a meeting. Medgar was Mississippi's first NAACP field secretary, and as the National Historic Landmark plaque on the house says, he was at the front of every major civil rights event in Mississippi from 1955 until his assassination. Murley and the 3 young Evers children were in the house at the time of the shooting. In an interview for a book after the murder trial in 1994, 31 years after his murder, Mrs. Evers said, "The children fell to the floor as he had taught them to do." Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The floor of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, where Mr. Hezekiah Watkins told us the story of how he became the youngest freedom rider and later showed us an enlargement of the mugshot from the first of his 109 arrests, hanging in a display of all the Mississippi Freedom Riders' mugshots. After that first arrest on July 7th, 1961, at the age of 13, for being mistaken for a freedom rider after a friend playfully shoved him into the door of a whites-only waiting room at a bus depot, he was put on death row at Parchman State Prison. Parchman was opened in 1901 and has been described as the most violent prison and the closest thing to slavery since the Civil War. 13-year-old Hezekiah spent 11 days in Parchman, during which his mother did not know where he was and feared he was dead. Despite this traumatic experience, he did in fact become a freedom rider and continued to take risks. As he spoke to our group, Mr. Watkins pointed to an enormous sculpture above our heads in the circular space in the middle of the exhibits. It looked like a tangle of giant ribbons with dashed lines of light on both edges of each ribbon, almost like an old movie film strip. Mr. Watkins told us that the ribbons reach out from that room in the 4 directions of the compass, and the lights are facts that tell the truth of the civil rights era. He said that our job, those of us listening to him, our job as pilgrims is to take those facts and stories away with us, back to our communities, to spread them. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The floor of Woodworth Chapel at Tougaloo College, a historically black college founded in 1869. The pulpit in Woodworth Chapel has hosted many famous speakers, including Reverend Dr. King, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Medgar Evers. As a private institution, Tougaloo College was not subject to the racist state policies of Mississippi in the civil rights era, but it risked losing its charter for becoming a safe haven for civil rights activists. Dr. Daphne Chamberlain, a 2001 Tougaloo College alumna and now a vice president of the college, told us, "Freedom riders and others knew that if they could make it into the gates of Tougaloo College, they were safe." Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The tile floor of the former statewide office of the Council of Federated Organizations, or COFO, at Jackson State University, another historically black school. This office is where activists including Bob Moses and David Dennis organized the 1963 Freedom Vote, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party co-founded by Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, Bob Moses, and James W. Wright in 1964, and the Freedom Summer of 1964. It has been described as the epicenter of the modern civil rights movement in Mississippi. The office is now the COFO Civil Rights Education Center, both preserving the past and supporting current organizers. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The sidewalk outside Alexander Hall on the Jackson State campus, where on May 14th, 1970, 10 days after 4 students involved in an anti-war protest were killed at Kent State, a similar event killed 2 and injured many more outside this women's dormitory. The protests here on May 14th were in response to rumors that Charles Evers, brother of Medgar, and his wife had been killed. The Jackson State shooting, where the victims were Black, got far less attention than Kent State, where the victims were white, both at the time and still today. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The sidewalk of Farish Street in Jackson, now a historic district. After the Civil War, this section of the street became the center of commerce and business activities for the Black community. It runs perpendicular to Capitol Street, where there was a concentration of white businesses. Medgar Evers made t-shirts that said, "Don't buy on Capitol," and he would send young Black men onto Capitol Street wearing them, where they would immediately be arrested. Evers was unloading another batch of those t-shirts from his trunk when he was killed. One of 2 funeral homes on Farish Street handled his burial. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The floor of the rebuilt Mount Zion United Methodist Church in Philadelphia. Mrs. Jewel McDonald sat at the front of the sanctuary as she told us about the night of June 16th, 1964, when her mother and brother were among many at the church beaten by a hooded mob that included law enforcement officers. The mob was looking for white folks from COFO. They didn't find them, and they burned the church down, one of 2 times that church has been burned to the ground. Outside the church, there are memorial markers for 3 COFO workers who were detained and then killed after leaving the church site on June 21st, Father's Day, while investigating the June 16th church burning. 2 white workers, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, who had come from out of state to help work for voting rights, and local Black activist James Chaney. Their bodies were not found for 6 weeks. When a nearby river was dragged during the search, 9 bodies were found, but none were these missing men. The church still holds a memorial for the 3 men every year on Father's Day. Their murderer was not indicted until 2005. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The grass by James Lee Chaney's gravesite in Meridian, where his daughter Angela spoke of forgiveness and of living a life guided by love. James was in Oxford, Ohio when she was born, training activists to survive in Mississippi. Angela quoted someone from that training who said that the activists expected that by the end of the Freedom Summer, they would all be dead. She was 11 days old when her father was murdered. His mother, Fannie Lee, his sister, Barbara, and his niece, Katrina, were all later buried adjacent to his grave. It is not, however, their traditional family gravesite. Their home church, which is also in Meridian, Mississippi, would not accept James's body for burial out of fear of being terrorized, nor would many other churches. Therefore, the graves are in the Okatibbe Missionary Baptist Church Seminary, but at a distance from the graves of those affiliated with the church. His grave marker has been vandalized countless times and is now supported by large metal braces to make it harder to knock down with vehicles. When Angela was asked if the Klan is still active in Meridian, she did not hesitate before saying yes. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. The dirt encrusted with glass and bricks from the Damer County store in Hattiesburg, This was the home of Vernon Damer Sr., NAACP leader, and it was the site of a gunfire and firebomb attack by the Ku Klux Klan on January 10, 1966, in which Vernon died defending his home and family. His family was able to escape out a back door, but he died the next day of burns and smoke inhalation. The house, the store, and the family car were all destroyed. The day before the attack, Vernon had said on the radio that he would pay the poll tax for anyone who could not afford to register to vote. Daniel Damer, Vernon's youngest son, still lives on and farms this land that has been in his family for many generations, and tells visitors his family's story. He asks us to notice the bits of glass and brick, but not to remove any. Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground. This sanctuary, too, is holy ground, because it is here that we come together to learn, to grow, and to live ever more fully into our values. We tell sacred stories here, and we listen for the messages for us in those stories, whether the stories are moments, months, decades, centuries, or millennia old. We find courage here to join those who are marginalized, to follow their leadership, and to keep moving forward toward justice and equity, even when we may be afraid of the short-term consequences. We find nourishment here when we are weary from doing that work, or for some of us, from the strain of being among the marginalized. Take off your shoes, friends, for you are on holy ground. Amen, and blessed be.
As Reverend Diana extinguishes the sanctuary chalice, please extinguish your chalice at home and say the words with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.